I already know I'm gonna get some hate for this. It seems like whenever something comes out that gets hyped, any negative opinions of it immediately leave you like this. I will say that there were various aspects of this show that I liked, and we will talk about them in this video, but there were several things that rubbed me the wrong way, though I do acknowledge that it is early and Iyanu could get considerably better, so we will just have to wait and see. One problem I have immediately is how many little conceptual quirks Iyanu seems to rip from Avatar, only slightly changed if not exactly the same. The main character being a chosen one type of protagonist is one thing, lots of fantasy media does that, but oh look, her eyes glow when she unlocks her secret power and she becomes very fatigued after she snaps out of it. The hub for the series is a giant walled city with strict rules and police. The wise mentor character feeds the main character a dish that sounds like random ingredients to outsiders, but is actually delicious in-universe. I could take a few of these things on their own, and that last one especially isn't really a big deal, but the problem is the blurred line between inspiration and just doing the same thing. Sure, shows can be ripoffs, and if they're better, then who really cares at the end of the day? If you're able to use your inspiration to create something great, then that's a great thing. The problem is that the inspiration in this case is one of the best animated series of all time, if not the best, and it will almost never be replicated. Plenty of others have tried. In fact, its own sequel couldn't even measure up to the quality standards set by the original.
This era was known as the Age of Wonders. But then came the Divine Wars.
The four nations lived together in harmony. Then, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
I'm aware that I come across as a butthurt Avatar fan when I make these critiques, and in some ways, I kind of am. Cartoon Network waited 2 decades for a slice of that pie, but they were actually the network known for doing these kinds of shows better. It had Samurai Jack, Teen Titans, Generator Rex, Young Justice, etc. The only shows with a more serious tone in its fantastic setting on Nickelodeon were Avatar itself and The Legend of Korra. After that, what even comes next? Danny Phantom? Martin Mystery? I mean, clearly you can see I'm stretching to find examples, because that last one was an acquired program from France. But that's exactly my point. If Cartoon Network truly wanted to look for an inspiration for its more serious fantasy shows, 1, they had plenty of material to be inspired from within, and they didn't have to look at a show from 20 years ago on a different network, and 2, they really should just focus on making new shows, period. It's not controversial to say that Cartoon Network is really close to death's door, with very few new shows coming out. And while the days of airing only Teen Titans Go non-stop are probably over, the fact that most of their lineup is reruns of shows that were cancelled years ago is not a good sign. Don't get me wrong, I love regular show and Adventure Time, but not at the cost of new blood getting its airtime. And going in, when the trailers came out for Iyanu, I was really excited because I thought this was the new blood we needed to see. I went into this really hoping it was good, and you know what? That's really all it was. Good. It's not mind-blowingly great or anything, and maybe that's because it needs time to get there. A lot of really good shows start out at that same quality anyway. Sometimes a show needs time to build into what it's capable of. Even Avatar itself was like that, with the second and third seasons being orders of magnitude better than the first, and with the second half of the first season being orders of magnitude better than the first half. In isolation though, Iyanu has its good and bad qualities that stand on their own merits. I think the setting is very interesting, and at the beginning there's not one obvious person you know is going to be the villain. There's a lot of competing antagonistic forces against Iyanu, and that's a really cool thing to see on a Cartoon Network show. The world building is really cool. Having it be based on a West African theme really sets it apart from other fantasy shows. I do have a slight problem with this show's world being called Yoruba Land. That's a bit on the nose for me, especially when you can still base a fantasy world on an actual place in real life without keeping it the same name. Avatar was able to do this well by having each of the 4 nations have a real-world inspiration, but keeping their own identity in the actual universe of the show. There's a reason the Water Tribe isn't called the Water Inuits, and that's because it's still being kept as its own thing, rather than something from our world in this fantasy world. The visuals are gorgeous. Some of the best we've seen on Cartoon Network in a long time, which I realize isn't saying much. But for like a decade now, every single show on that network has looked somewhat like Clarence or Steven Universe. While shows with that type of art style certainly have their place, the overly rounded, thin outline, high saturation look of those 2 shows, and Uncle Grandpa, and Craig of the Creek, and We Bare Bears, etc., can't be the only type of show on a network. Iyanu actually shows some variety for Cartoon Network visually, which I like. That said, the show looks better to me in individual frames than it does in motion. A lot of the scenes are very still and motionless looking, which could be the result of it starting out as a graphic novel. That was one of the criticisms of The Killing Joke, and it seems to be present here. I like the protagonist, Iyanu herself, and I can definitely see that she's the kind of character that really has room to grow and develop, while still being likable enough at the beginning that the audience can want to root for her. This comes with the caveat of the other characters not really being that interesting to me. Bihi seems like a cool character, but he's the kind of character I can see glimpses of already the moment he's introduced. He's the most cliché one of the group, and there's hints that he might be a love interest, which I thought were kind of telegraphed. Toye, to me, does look like a very intriguing character. As his father ranked high in the military, he doesn't really want that life, and instead joins alongside Iyanu, often in a peacemaker sort of role. I think there's room for him to develop and really show his backstory and prove that he can be his own man, but honestly, I think I just predicted his arc, and there's only a few episodes out so far. If you notice, I'm kind of speaking vaguely about everything because I do think there's a lot more room for this world and these characters to be established, and because this show only has a few episodes right now, it can definitely develop its own identity, and some of the things I said could change. But if you notice, a lot of the good things I had to say had caveats to them. That really worries me because if you have a show like this, it's very easy to mess up with the scrutiny that comes with the fantasy genre. And when a show is very clearly similar to something that already exists, it's going to draw comparisons, especially when that inspiration is a show that's really, really good. One point against Iyanu is that it's a graphic novel that became a cartoon, whereas Avatar was a cartoon that became a graphic novel. There's certain prices to pay with that, and one of those is that each 22-minute episode has to contribute to the overall narrative, while still being its own self-contained narrative. You can't get away with long chains of events like you can in a graphic novel. And while I haven't read the graphic novel, I imagine the anchor points of where certain events have to happen in a show with 22-minute episodes has to result in pacing changes, sometimes to the detriment of the overall narrative. I mean, the first episode doesn't really have a central conflict of its own, and there are long scenes with not much going on, but then plot-relevant scenes go by way too fast, and it's not like they spend a lot of time on exposition either, which they could have stood to do more. Avatar really benefited from being written as TV episodes first and foremost, and I think Iyanu could suffer from that not being the case. And there's not a lot of mainstream proof of concept either. They've been trying to get Bone animated as either a series or movies for decades and it hasn't happened, and that's maybe for the better. But, if nothing else, these few episodes out right now have made me interested in picking up the graphic novels and watching the rest of the series. But I have my doubts about the direction it's going, and because it's so similar to something I already really like, I don't know how it will turn out. But, I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have a good one, everyone.